During the events of Rogue One, we saw Jedha City be completely obliterated by the Death Star as a test of its super laser under the orders of Tarkin. The devastating hit from the space station's laser decimated the planet of Jedha, leaving a giant crater and a dark abyss within the Force itself. Since Jedha had long been a place of worship for those who followed the Force, including the Jedi and the Guardians of the Whills, the attack on the planet was like an attack on the Force. Thus, in 1 ABY, when Luke Skywalker traveled to Jedha with the Rebels, he claimed that the remnants of Jedha was the worst place in the galaxy, and that he could feel the presence of the dark side weighing on him. I want to jump into the canon Star Wars comic series from 2015, which takes place in the gap between A New Hope and The Empire Strikes Back, as Luke is still trying to become a Jedi. In this story, not only does Luke fight in the battle for Jedha, but he learns more about the crew of Rogue One, and he comes face to face with a crazy Force cult. After Saw Gerrera's death in Rogue One, his followers, the Partisans, served his second-in-command, a Tognath named Benthic. Thus, an operation was led by Leia Organa to travel to Jedha and convince the Partisans to rejoin the Rebel Alliance and fight the Empire. Luke and Leia rescued one of the Partisan leaders named Ubin Des, as well as a religious pilgrim named Chulko from a firefight on the surface of Jedha. This guy Chulko had wanted to join the Guardians of the Whills, which is what Chirrut and Baze were in Rogue One, but he didn't get the chance because the sacred temple was destroyed in Jedha City. On the neighboring planet of Na Jedha, Luke spoke to Chulko about the destruction of Jedha as they stared at the broken moon together. Luke said it was the worst thing that he had ever seen, and Chulko described Jedha as a holy moon that was maimed and dying, and he said that the Force was sickened there now. However, Chulko claimed that the attack on Jedha must have been the will of the Force, and there must be a reason that it happened. He still had faith in the Force, and Luke understood how he felt. Meanwhile, Leia convinced Ubin Des to take them to the rest of the Partisans to try to make a deal, comparing the attack on Jedha to the complete destruction of Alderaan. Ubin and Chulko brought Luke, Han, and Leia back to Jedha. However, they had bags on their heads, and Luke sensed that the Partisans were going to kill them. Benthic did want to kill them, but he agreed to listen to what Leia had to say, and eventually he agreed to accept supplies from the rebellion. However, Luke was very critical of the Partisans' brutal and cruel methods. Sensing that he was conflicted, Ubin invited him to help distribute filters to people in the city of Jed. Despite the terrible conditions, people still lived there. When they arrived in the city, Chulko told Luke that there was another temple that he could go to, constructed at the edge of the abyss by the cult of the Central Isopter. These guys are pretty crazy. They worshipped the Force in areas of violence, and they believed that the destruction of Jedha City was a blessing. Ubin also asked Luke if he knew about Rogue One, and he said he only knew a little, that it was a mission to Scarif to steal the Death Star plans, and that the rebel commanders seemed almost embarrassed about it afterwards. Ubin said that they should be, since the team on Rogue One were people good enough to disobey orders to do the right thing, and they died for it. She said that Jyn Erso had led the mission and that she wished she could have gone with her. Luke asked to learn more about Jyn, but they were interrupted by stormtroopers outside the building incinerating citizens. Without hesitation, Luke immediately leapt into action and killed all of the stormtroopers by himself. Luke was changed by their brutality, and he told Benthic that he understood what was at stake on Jedha. Together, the Partisans and the Rebels worked to destroy a large drill that the Empire was trying to use to get more Kyber crystals. Afterwards, Luke wanted to learn more about the Force, and he was desperate for knowledge, even going to the Central Isopter's temple with Chulko against Leia's wishes. The closer they got to the abyss where Jedha City had once been, Luke said that he could feel the darkness in the Force getting worse, and that the desecration of the Force was like a magnet. The two of them were greeted by cultists, and they revealed to Luke that the Force itself, or the Abyss, was the teacher, not them. Luke began to feel pain as the disturbance in the Force grew stronger, and it was basically giving him headaches. He said that the temple on the Abyss was the worst place in the galaxy. The cultists told Luke that death was the answer to all questions, and that they watched the Abyss and tried to understand it. They claimed they had nothing to teach Luke, and it was the darkness within the Abyss that would teach him. Luke was very disturbed by the way the cultists viewed the Force and worshipped death, and he told Chulko that he wanted to be a Jedi, not whatever the cultists were. However, Chulko was intrigued and said that the Force would guide them to where they needed to be, and the cultists told him to meditate and listen to the Abyss. Luke refused, saying that he thought it was a path that he couldn't walk down without losing himself. However, Chulko was possessed by the darkness in the Abyss, his eyes rolling back in his head, and he attacked Luke, forcing Luke to kill him. As he died, Chulko said that the Abyss had overwhelmed him with madness, and the dark side was too strong to resist there. Luke was saddened by his death, and he said that he had to be patient on his journey to become a Jedi. The cultists then said that Luke had learned the only lesson that they had to teach, that the dark side was perilous. The road that Luke was on had led only to madness, and that without a true teacher, Luke would fall to the dark side. They told Luke that he could not fall because too much relied on him. Afterwards, Luke spoke to Ubin about Chulko's death, and he said that he had been thinking about Jin and Rogue One. They had taken whatever steps they needed and sacrificed everything, which all led to him taking the shot that destroyed the Death Star. Luke said he was glad that he didn't know about Rogue One at the time because he didn't know if he could have succeeded under all that pressure. He wasn't sure if he would have been able to make the shot if he knew how many people had died to put him in that position. Ubin replied that she thought he would have because he's a hero. Rogue One didn't know that Luke would be there to take the shot. They just trusted that someone would finish what they started after they were gone. Leia agreed and said that the rebels in the battle at Scarif had all sacrificed and done what they needed to do without hesitating. If one person had hesitated, then the Death Star could still be around. So guys, I really like this story, even though the 2015 Star Wars comic series is not my favorite. I think this is a great arc. I really like the idea of Luke exploring other Force-sensitive planets and really important locations, and this comic run really expands on the lore. The cult of the Central Isopter were originally for Rogue One. I think they appear in some footage. Apparently they're in the movie in the background, I believe, but they're not really explained. You have to look in the visual dictionary. So it's cool to see them here talking to Luke. I'm always fascinated by the other Force religions and groups that worship the Force in the galaxy. Obviously, Jedi and Sith are the most famous, but there are a ton more, and they all look at the Force a lot differently. So I really like Luke meeting with them, learning how they view the Force, and essentially being repelled by it. I just think that's awesome. I think that this is a great way to fill in the gaps in between Empire and A New Hope, because that's a 3-year time gap until Luke trains with Yoda. So it's cool to see Luke still doing Jedi stuff, being powerful, even though he hasn't been trained by Yoda yet. He's basically training himself during this time period. And I actually really like this story. I'm not a fan of Salvatore LaRocca's art because he just traces stills from the movies and then puts the actors' faces in the art for the comics. That's a whole other controversy to talk about that people have been, talking about on Twitter for years. But anyway, I really like this story. I love the lore, love the Force aspects of it. So I hope that you guys enjoyed it as well. I was very excited to make this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, make sure to like and subscribe. And as always, may the Force be with you.